TIFU by forgetting my girlfriend's birthday and then trying to fix it with a surprise party. I've always prided myself on being a pretty good boyfriend. I remember the little things, her favorite snacks, her favorite color, the way she likes her coffee. I've never had a problem keeping track of important dates, like anniversaries or birthdays. That is, until this year. For some reason, her birthday completely slipped my mind. It wasn't even like I forgot about it a week in advance or even a few days before. I forgot the day of. It all started the night before. We had dinner at my place, a casual, low-key evening with Netflix and a home-cooked meal. She seemed a little quiet during dinner, but I chalked it up to her being tired from work. She mentioned a few times that she had plans for the next day, but didn't go into much detail. I, being the typical guy I am, didn't think much of it and figured it was no big deal. The next morning, I woke up late, had my coffee, and checked my phone like I always do. That's when I noticed it. Asterisk happy birthday, babe. Hope it's the best day ever, asterisk. A message from one of her friends. It felt like a punch to the gut. My stomach dropped. I blinked a few times, hoping that somehow I had misread the message or that it was a mistake. But no, it was very much her birthday. Panic set in. I quickly glanced at my calendar, hoping there was some way to salvage the situation. Nothing. No notes. No reminder. I had completely blanked on her birthday. In that moment, I realized that not only had I forgotten her birthday, but she had been dropping hints all week that she was excited about it. I felt like the world's worst boyfriend. I started thinking about how to fix this. My first idea was to rush out and get her a present. But then it hit me. It's too late for that. A birthday gift doesn't mean much if it's a last-minute thought, right? No, I needed to do something special. I needed to pull off an epic surprise to show her how much I cared. And fast. After a few moments of frantically pacing around, I came up with an idea, a surprise party. But not just any surprise party. I'd get her friends together, set up everything perfectly, and make the evening one she'd never forget. Sure, I was already behind the 8 ball, but I could make up for it if I pulled this off right. I immediately called a few of her close friends, apologizing for being an idiot and explaining the situation. They were supportive, though they clearly found the whole thing a little hilarious. They all agreed to help. One of them had a venue available, a small bar where we could rent out the back room for private events. It was the perfect place, and it was only an hour away from where we lived, so the timing wasn't too bad. The plan was to keep it low-key and intimate with just her closest friends and family. I was on a roll. I quickly ordered food, cake, decorations, and a playlist that I thought would hit all the right notes. I didn't even care that I was stressing out about everything, because I was on a mission. Nothing could go wrong, right? Wrong. As I started setting up, things began to spiral out of control. The food delivery was late, like really late. And the cake? The cake was a disaster. I had ordered a beautiful custom cake with a fun design, but the bakery messed up the order. Instead of happy birthday, her name, in elegant gold lettering, it said, happy day, her name, in clumsy red icing. I stared at it for a moment, wondering if I could somehow make it look intentional. But no, it looked like a toddler had been let loose with a piping bag. I tried to call the bakery, but they were closed for the day. Of course, they were. It's not like I could drive to another bakery last minute. And then I realized I had forgotten to pick up a gift. I hadn't been able to find the perfect one earlier in the day, so I'd convinced myself I could make up for it with the party. Now here I was, with no gift and a subpar cake. I started to feel the weight of the situation settling on me. What seemed like a genius plan was falling apart, piece by piece. I was putting myself in a worse position than before. Still, I soldiered on. The friends and family started to trickle in, and I forced myself to smile and be normal. But inside, I was a mess. I was half hoping that no one would notice how much I was freaking out, but of course they did. One of her best friends pulled me aside and said, "Hey, everything's going to be fine, but I just want to be clear. You did remember, right?" I laughed awkwardly, mumbling something about being totally on top of it, just, running a bit behind on a few things. When my girlfriend finally arrived, she looked so surprised, maybe a little too surprised. At first, she looked confused, and I could tell that she was trying to piece together why we were suddenly at this random bar with so many people there. She was totally caught off guard, but I thought maybe she was just feeling a little overwhelmed by the surprise. But then she pulled me aside and asked, What is going on? Why didn't you tell me you were planning all this? I froze. Was she upset? Was she mad? I I forgot. I admitted feeling like the worst person on the planet. I didn't remember until this morning, and I tried to make it up to you by throwing this party. Her face softened, and she laughed, shaking her head. You really went all out, didn't you? You've literally never thrown a surprise party before in your life. And the cake, it's something. I couldn't help but laugh, too. In the end, it wasn't the grand gesture that mattered to her. She told me that while she appreciated the effort, she would have been happy with something simple, like a nice dinner or just a quiet evening together. All the stress and panic I'd put myself through for something over the top had been unnecessary. We still had a good time at the party, but the lesson was clear. Sometimes it's not about the big gestures. It's the thought that counts. And I had put way too much pressure on myself to fix something that wasn't really broken. In the end, I apologized again, and she forgave me. But I'll never forget the look on her face when she saw the cake, and I'll never forget how much I overcomplicated what could have been a much simpler and much sweeter birthday celebration. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a homemade dinner and ending up in the ER. So, this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still recovering emotionally and physically from it. I, 28M, have been talking to this girl, Sarah, 26F, for a while. We met at a mutual friend's party about a month ago, and ever since then, we've been texting back and forth, hanging out occasionally, and getting to know each other. Things are going great. I could tell she was into me, and I was definitely interested in her. However, I want to take things to the next level, so I thought I'd do something special to show her how much I cared. I've always been kind of hopeless romantic, and I figured a homemade dinner would be the perfect gesture. I mean, who doesn't love a good home-cooked meal, right? It's intimate, thoughtful, and shows you're willing to put in the effort. I decided I'd make something a little more ambitious than just pasta or a salad. No, I was going to go all out: steak, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, and a nice dessert to top it all off. Now, I'm not a chef by any means, but I'm a decent cook. I can follow a recipe, and I've had my fair share of successful meals in the past. But this was different. I knew I had to pull out all the stops to impress Sarah. She was coming over to my apartment at 7 p.m., and I had planned everything down to the last detail. I even set the mood with some candles and soft music in the background. The day of the dinner, I spent the whole afternoon preparing. I went to the grocery store, got everything I needed, and came home to start cooking. I began with the mashed potatoes, since they'd need some time to cook, and then set about the steak. I had bought a beautiful cut of ribeye, seasoned it with salt, pepper, and a little garlic powder, and was getting ready to sear it in the pan. Things started going downhill from there. While the potatoes were boiling, I decided to prep the vegetables. I had bought some carrots, Brussels sprouts, and asparagus. The Brussels sprouts looked a little off, but I convinced myself they were fine. I just trimmed off the bad parts, and since everything else was going so well, I figured there was no harm. Then came the steak. I was heating up the cast iron skillet on high, and once it was nice and hot, I threw the steak in. Now, I've read somewhere that you should never overcrowd the pan, so I was only cooking one steak at a time. But this was taking longer than I expected. The steak was supposed to get a nice, crisp crust, but it wasn't happening. I wasn't panicking yet, though. I turned the heat up and started focusing on other things like stirring the potatoes. That's when the first major mistake happened. I didn't realize that my skillet was way too hot. I hadn't heard the sizzle at first, but when I looked over, I saw smoke billowing out from the pan. I rushed over and quickly flipped the steak, but it was already burnt on one side. I tried not to panic. I thought, okay, I'll just finish cooking it and maybe cover it with sauce or something to mask the burnt flavor. But when I went to flip it again, I saw that the fat on the steak was sizzling and popping out of the pan, catching the nearby tea towels on fire. I immediately grabbed the towel and tossed it in the sink. I then tried to salvage the steak, but by now it was so overcooked, it was like chewing through leather. Next, I turned my attention to the potatoes. They were cooked through, but when I went to mash them, I realized I hadn't bought enough butter, and I didn't have any milk. What was supposed to be creamy mashed potatoes turned into a lumpy, dry mess. Great. By this point, I was getting seriously frustrated. I had less than an hour before Sarah was supposed to arrive, and my plan for a romantic, homemade meal was slowly disintegrating into chaos. I could already picture her walking into my apartment, and her first impression would be of me covered in sweat, surrounded by burnt food and a smoky kitchen. But I was determined to salvage the dinner, so I pushed on. I put the vegetables into the oven to roast, but by now, they had been in there too long and started to burn. The Brussels sprouts had blackened to the point where I wouldn't even feed them to a dog, and the carrots and asparagus were dry and shriveled. The final blow came when I went to plate everything. The steak was too tough to chew, the mashed potatoes were a disaster, and the vegetables looked like they had been left out in the sun for days. I had no choice but to resort to my last option. I opened a can of green beans. The healthy side dish I had promised was now just a sad afterthought. At this point, I had 20 minutes to clean up and try to salvage my dignity. I wiped down the counters, threw the burnt things away, and set the table as best I could. I even reheated the canned green beans to try to make them look fresh. Sarah arrived on time, and as soon as she walked in, I could tell something was off. The apartment smelled like burnt food, and the kitchen was a disaster zone. I tried to play it cool, saying, "Hey, sorry about the smell. I was experimenting with a new recipe." She smiled politely, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. When I brought the food to the table, she took one look at the steak and raised an eyebrow. What happened to it?" she asked. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. "It's a new technique," I said, trying to keep the mood light. But deep down, I knew it was a mess. We ate the food in silence. Well, I ate as much as I could, and she politely picked at her plate. The canned green beans didn't exactly impress her, and she barely touched the potatoes. The awkwardness was palpable, and I could feel myself sinking deeper into embarrassment with every passing second. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it was hard to ignore the fact that she was slowly inching away from me, both figuratively and literally. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she said, "I think I should head home. Thanks for the dinner, though. I appreciate the effort." I walked her to the door, and she gave me a quick hug before leaving. The next day, I received a text from her. She thanked me again for the dinner and told me she had a good time, but she didn't think we were a match. I knew exactly why. Who wants to date a guy who can't even cook a decent meal? So yeah, that's how I ended up single after thinking I could impress a girl with my cooking skills. It's safe to say that I've learned my lesson. Sometimes, store-bought pizza is a much better option than trying to cook a fancy meal. Now, I'm sticking to takeout and leaving the cooking to the professionals. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a homemade dinner and ending up in the ER. So, this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still recovering emotionally and physically from it. I, 28M, have been talking to this girl, Sarah, 26F, for a while. We met at a mutual friend's party about a month ago, and ever since then, we've been texting back and forth, hanging out occasionally, and getting to know each other. Things are going great. I could tell she was into me, and I was definitely interested in her. However, I want to take things to the next level, so I thought I'd do something special to show her how much I cared. I've always been kind of hopeless romantic, and I figured a homemade dinner would be the perfect gesture. I mean, who doesn't love a good home-cooked meal, right? It's intimate, thoughtful, and shows you're willing to put in the effort. I decided I'd make something a little more ambitious than just pasta or a salad. No, I was going to go all out: steak, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, and a nice dessert to top it all off. Now, I'm not a chef by any means, but I'm a decent cook. I can follow a recipe, and I've had my fair share of successful meals in the past. But this was different. I knew I had to pull out all the stops to impress Sarah. She was coming over to my apartment at 7 p.m., and I had planned everything down to the last detail. I even set the mood with some candles and soft music in the background. The day of the dinner, I spent the whole afternoon preparing. I went to the grocery store, got everything I needed, and came home to start cooking. I began with the mashed potatoes, since they'd need some time to cook, and then set about the steak. I had bought a beautiful cut of ribeye, seasoned it with salt, pepper, and a little garlic powder, and was getting ready to sear it in the pan. Things started going downhill from there. While the potatoes were boiling, I decided to prep the vegetables. I had bought some carrots, Brussels sprouts, and asparagus. The Brussels sprouts looked a little off, but I convinced myself they were fine. I just trimmed off the bad parts, and since everything else was going so well, I figured there was no harm. Then came the steak. I was heating up the cast iron skillet on high, and once it was nice and hot, I threw the steak in. Now, I've read somewhere that you should never overcrowd the pan, so I was only cooking one steak at a time. But this was taking longer than I expected. The steak was supposed to get a nice, crisp crust, but it wasn't happening. I wasn't panicking yet, though. I turned the heat up and started focusing on other things like stirring the potatoes. That's when the first major mistake happened. I didn't realize that my skillet was way too hot. I hadn't heard the sizzle at first, but when I looked over, I saw smoke billowing out from the pan. I rushed over and quickly flipped the steak, but it was already burnt on one side. I tried not to panic. I thought, okay, I'll just finish cooking it and maybe cover it with sauce or something to mask the burnt flavor. But when I went to flip it again, I saw that the fat on the steak was sizzling and popping out of the pan, catching the nearby tea towels on fire. I immediately grabbed the towel and tossed it in the sink. I then tried to salvage the steak, but by now it was so overcooked, it was like chewing through leather. Next, I turned my attention to the potatoes. They were cooked through, but when I went to mash them, I realized I hadn't bought enough butter, and I didn't have any milk. What was supposed to be creamy mashed potatoes turned into a lumpy, dry mess. Great. By this point, I was getting seriously frustrated. I had less than an hour before Sarah was supposed to arrive, and my plan for a romantic, homemade meal was slowly disintegrating into chaos. I could already picture her walking into my apartment, and her first impression would be of me covered in sweat, surrounded by burnt food and a smoky kitchen. But I was determined to salvage the dinner, so I pushed on. I put the vegetables into the oven to roast, but by now, they had been in there too long and started to burn. The Brussels sprouts had blackened to the point where I wouldn't even feed them to a dog, and the carrots and asparagus were dry and shriveled. The final blow came when I went to plate everything. The steak was too tough to chew, the mashed potatoes were a disaster, and the vegetables looked like they had been left out in the sun for days. I had no choice but to resort to my last option. I opened a can of green beans. The healthy side dish I had promised was now just a sad afterthought. At this point, I had 20 minutes to clean up and try to salvage my dignity. I wiped down the counters, threw the burnt things away, and set the table as best I could. I even reheated the canned green beans to try to make them look fresh. Sarah arrived on time, and as soon as she walked in, I could tell something was off. The apartment smelled like burnt food, and the kitchen was a disaster zone. I tried to play it cool, saying, "Hey, sorry about the smell. I was experimenting with a new recipe." She smiled politely, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. When I brought the food to the table, she took one look at the steak and raised an eyebrow. What happened to it?" she asked. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. "It's a new technique," I said, trying to keep the mood light. But deep down, I knew it was a mess. We ate the food in silence. Well, I ate as much as I could, and she politely picked at her plate. The canned green beans didn't exactly impress her, and she barely touched the potatoes. The awkwardness was palpable, and I could feel myself sinking deeper into embarrassment with every passing second. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it was hard to ignore the fact that she was slowly inching away from me, both figuratively and literally. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she said, "I think I should head home. Thanks for the dinner, though. I appreciate the effort." I walked her to the door, and she gave me a quick hug before leaving. The next day, I received a text from her. She thanked me again for the dinner and told me she had a good time, but she didn't think we were a match. I knew exactly why. Who wants to date a guy who can't even cook a decent meal? So yeah, that's how I ended up single after thinking I could impress a girl with my cooking skills. It's safe to say that I've learned my lesson. Sometimes, store-bought pizza is a much better option than trying to cook a fancy meal. Now, I'm sticking to takeout and leaving the cooking to the professionals. TIFU by accidentally setting off a fire alarm during my job interview. So, this happened last week, and I still can't believe I managed to screw it up this badly. It's a story about my first big interview, a moment I had prepared for months, and how everything came crashing down in a truly spectacular way. I've been unemployed for a while now, trying to make a career shift into tech. After countless applications and rejections, I finally got a call back from a mid-sized software company that seemed to have a good work culture, a decent salary, and an exciting product. I was over the moon. The interview was set for 10 a.m., and I had made sure everything was perfect. I rehearsed my answers, updated my resume, and even made sure my outfit was smart casual enough to make me look professional but not too stiff. The morning of the interview, I was a nervous wreck. I double-checked my appearance in the mirror, packed all the necessary documents, and set off early enough to avoid any traffic. But of course, I was still a little panicked about being late. As I arrived at the building, I thought I had plenty of time to spare, but the nerves were still there. I walked into the reception, checked in, and waited in a small lobby, going over my answers to the expected questions in my head. The receptionist called me in at 9:55 a.m., and I followed her to a conference room where the interview would take place. The room was modern, sleek, and smelled faintly of coffee. On the table were a few cups, a laptop, and a shiny, high-tech projector. I felt a little out of place, but I was determined to give it my all. The interviewer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a serious demeanor, stood up from behind the desk and shook my hand. He introduced himself as Mark, and we exchanged pleasantries before sitting down. The interview started well enough. Mark asked me some standard questions about my previous experience, what I knew about the company, and why I wanted the job. I felt confident in my responses. Then, about 15 minutes into the interview, Mark asked if I wanted some water, and I politely declined. That's when things started to go wrong. You see, I had no idea that the small water bottle on the table had a built-in pump. I wasn't familiar with it, and I mistakenly assumed it was a regular bottle I could just open and drink from. As I reached for it, I tried to twist the top off, but it wouldn't budge. Panicked, I pressed on the side, thinking maybe there was some kind of button I could press to open it, and that's when it happened. The pump shot out a high-pressure stream of water all over the table, causing the papers to get wet and splashing a bit onto my lap. I froze, horrified, as Mark just stared at me, trying to process what had just happened. It was like time slowed down. I had no idea what to do. The water didn't stop. It just kept coming out, flooding the table. I'm so sorry, I stammered, trying to grab napkins from the corner of the table to soak up the mess. But it was no use. The water kept coming, and the napkins weren't nearly enough to stop it. Mark, still in shock, stood up and moved his laptop away from the growing puddle. I could see him try not to smile, but he was clearly uncomfortable. The worst part? I couldn't stop the pump. The water just kept coming, and it was like some kind of cruel prank. I'm sitting there, drenched in water, while my potential future boss is watching me struggle to stop a fountain of water from flooding his conference room. It felt like a nightmare. I panicked. I pressed harder on the pump. But all that did was make the water squirt harder, sending a fine mist of water over everything. I looked around, hoping for someone to come help, but the room was entirely enclosed. I was completely alone with my interview disaster. Mark, I'm so sorry. I have no idea how this happened. I thought it was a regular bottle, and then I couldn't even finish my sentence. At this point, I had completely embarrassed myself. I wanted to die on the spot. Mark, to his credit, was actually really calm about the whole thing. He stopped me mid-sentence and said, "It's okay. It's not the end of the world. Let's just get this cleaned up first." He got up, walked to the door, and came back with a handful of towels. He placed them on the table and started drying off the mess I had made. The whole time, I was just sitting there mortified. He was wiping down my disaster while I sat, dripping wet and in disbelief at what was happening. After a few minutes, we managed to get the situation under control. Mark set the now-soaked napkins and towels aside and looked back at me. "All right, well, let's continue," he said with a tired but kind smile. I thought that maybe we could salvage this. Maybe, just maybe, I could steer the conversation back to my qualifications and prove that I could still be a good candidate for the job. But then I heard it. The alarm. It was a faint beeping noise at first, but it quickly escalated into the loud, high-pitched wail of a fire alarm. My heart dropped. The water had triggered the alarm. The room was filled with a shrill, deafening noise, and my immediate instinct was to stand up, completely overwhelmed. The fire alarm was going off, and I still didn't know why or how to stop it. Mark stood up quickly. "Stay here. I'll be right back." I was left alone in the room with the siren blaring in my ears. I looked around, trying to figure out what to do, but I was totally helpless. Eventually, Mark came back with a maintenance guy, who quickly silenced the alarm after checking something in the system. I heard the alarm die down to a quiet hum, and for a second, there was silence. It felt like I could finally breathe again. But that was it. The interview was over. Mark, ever the professional, gave me a polite smile and said, "We'll follow up with you soon. Thanks for coming in." I didn't even know what to say at that point. I was humiliated. I had ruined my shot at the job, and I couldn't even blame anyone but myself. I thanked them both, made my exit, and immediately called my best friend, ranting about the whole disaster. Long story short, I didn't get the job. I'm still waiting to hear back from other companies, but I can't get the image of that fire alarm out of my head. I just wanted a fresh start, but instead, I somehow managed to create the most embarrassing job interview story I'll likely tell for the rest of my life. TLDR, I accidentally set off a fire alarm during my job interview after mistakenly activating a water pump on the table, flooding the room and causing chaos. TIFU by accidentally getting my coworker arrested after a misunderstanding involving a fake job offer. So, let me set the stage. I work at a medium-sized tech company. It's a chill job, and I've been here for a couple of years. The office vibe is laid back, people are friendly, and there's not too much drama. I get along with my coworkers, especially Jake. Jake is one of those guys who's always upbeat, cracks a joke, and genuinely cares about the people around him. We chat frequently about everything under the sun, from work to personal stuff. Now, about a month ago, I noticed something odd in the break room. A random piece of paper was pinned to the bulletin board with the company logo on it. It looked like one of those ads you'd see for job openings, but the wording was a bit off. The flyer said something like, "Join our team. Fantastic growth opportunities. High-paying roles available immediately. Reach out to name at phone number." I wasn't thinking much of it at the time, but the flyer stuck in the back of my mind. A few days later, Jake and I were chatting about the usual stuff when he brought up something interesting. He said, "Hey, I saw that job out on the bulletin board. Do you know anything about it? It sounds like a great opportunity." At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I remembered the flyer. I mentioned it to him, but I didn't think it was a big deal. Maybe it was an internal promotion or something. Jake seemed interested and asked if I had the contact info for the person listed on the flyer. I had the number saved in my phone from when I'd taken a photo of the flyer. So, I sent it over to him. Later that day, I got a call from Jake, sounding pretty excited. "Hey, I called that number," he said. "They're offering me an interview for a position. This is wild. Thanks for sharing that with me, man." I was glad for him, but also confused because, honestly, I hadn't heard anything about any new job openings within our company. But whatever, I thought, maybe it was a side project or something. After all, it's not unusual for companies to offer new roles from time to time. Jake ended up having the interview the next day. He came into work the following morning with a massive grin. He was practically glowing. "I got the job," he said, waving a piece of paper with an offer letter on it. I was shocked. I didn't know what to think. How had this happened so quickly? He was so enthusiastic, though, that I just congratulated him and didn't want to be the wet blanket pointing out how weird this whole situation was. The next day, Jake took a half day off to get his background check and some paperwork done. But a couple of hours later, I got a text from him, and it was clear something was wrong. "Dude, I need you to call me ASAP," the message said. I called him back right away, worried something had happened. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked. Jake's voice was shaky. "I don't know how to explain this, but the cops are here. They arrested me, man." I froze. My first thought was that he was joking, but then he said something that made everything click, and suddenly I was more confused than ever. I don't even know what's going on. They said the company I interviewed with isn't real. I gave them the offer letter, and they said it's all fake. "What the hell?" Jake went on. "I tried calling the number from the flyer, and some guy answered, but the cops were saying it's some kind of scam. They're looking into everything. And now I'm being detained. I felt my stomach drop. Everything I thought I knew about this job offer was flipping upside down. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. I thought maybe there was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how strange the whole thing was. Without thinking, I rushed to the police station. When I arrived, I asked to speak to Jake, but they told me to wait. I sat there for what felt like hours, but it was probably closer to 30 minutes before an officer came to speak to me. "You're my name?" the officer asked. "Yeah," I said, panic starting to creep in. "What's going on?" "Jake, he's my co-worker. He was arrested for something. I don't know what's happening." The officer looked at me with a blank expression. "You're the one who sent him the job flyer?" I blinked. "What?" "I didn't send him a job flyer. I just showed him the one on the bulletin board. I didn't know it was fake." The officer gave me a skeptical look. "You understand the situation, right? This is a full-blown scam. That flyer was posted by someone pretending to be a recruiter for your company. The number on that flyer led to a man who's now under investigation for multiple counts of fraud. He's been targeting people at your workplace. We're still gathering information, but this is pretty serious." My brain was scrambled. How could I have been so blind? I didn't even think to question the flyer when I saw it. It had the company logo and everything. I thought it was just some internal job posting. After explaining everything I knew to the officer, they let me speak to Jake. He was still shaken up, sitting in a holding room, his face pale. He was confused, scared, and embarrassed. I tried to comfort him, but honestly, I was just as rattled. It turns out that the recruiter who had contacted Jake was the same person behind the scam, and the job offer was completely fake. The guy was using real company logos and making up false job offers to lure people in, get their personal information, and either sell it or use it for more fraud. The job offer Jake received was an elaborate setup, an attempt to exploit him for his personal details. Jake, like the rest of the people who'd fallen for it, was just a victim of this scam. I ended up getting a call from HR a few hours later. The company was investigating the situation and advising everyone who'd seen the flyer to report any unusual contacts. HR was working with the police to ensure everything got sorted out. But the damage was already done. Jake had been arrested, even though it was clear he had no part in any of it. Fortunately, after some legal wrangling and a lot of phone calls, they eventually released him. He wasn't charged, but it was a terrifying experience for him. And for me, to be honest. Looking back, I feel absolutely awful. I had no idea that something as simple as showing Jake the flyer would lead to this. I should have questioned everything instead of assuming it was legitimate. I learned a valuable lesson. Never trust job offers that look too good to be true, and never assume that something posted at work is guaranteed to be real. In the end, Jake is okay now, but he's understandably shaken up. And as for me, I'm just grateful that I wasn't the one to end up in the holding cell. TIFU by accidentally sabotaging my best friend's wedding. I never thought I'd be the one to ruin my best friend's wedding. I always imagined I'd be the guy who stood at the altar, giving a toast that would make everyone cry, telling stories from our childhood that would make the bride's mom chuckle awkwardly, and being the groomsman who danced the hardest at the reception. I was sure I had a solid understanding of how weddings worked, and how not to be the guy who ruins everything. That was, of course, until last Saturday, when I proved myself wrong in the most spectacularly awkward way possible. It all started a couple of weeks before the wedding. My best friend, Jake, and his fiancée, Emily, were deep into wedding planning. They'd been engaged for over a year, and the wedding was now only a few weeks away. Emily was basically running the show, which was fine by Jake, since he'd never been one to get bogged down in the details. That's where I came in. I was helping with a bachelor party and also had the honor of being Jake's best man. I took the role seriously and started doing everything I could to make sure the event went off without a hitch. A few days before the wedding, Emily asked me if I would help her pick up some last-minute things from a local store. It seemed innocent enough. She had a specific request for a special drink she wanted to have for the wedding reception. She'd been raving about this rare vintage champagne, which was apparently sold at a small boutique store in town. Of course, I agreed, thinking it would be a quick errand that would save her a bit of stress. I went to the store and walked up to the counter, asking the clerk if they had any bottles of this particular champagne. The woman behind the counter nodded enthusiastically and said, "Yes, we have one bottle left. It's a special limited edition, so you're in luck." Now, let me pause for a second to clarify. I have no taste in alcohol. I drink whatever's cheapest, and my knowledge of wine and champagne is about as deep as a puddle. When Emily said she wanted something rare, I took that to mean expensive. I had no idea what the actual value of the bottle was or how important it was to her wedding. I handed over my credit card, bought the bottle, and left, feeling quite pleased with myself for running the errand so efficiently. Fast forward to the day of the wedding. I woke up early, as best men are supposed to do, and started getting ready. I double-checked my speech, made sure my suit was wrinkle-free, and even helped Jake with some last-minute tasks. I had the bottle of champagne in the back seat of my car, knowing Emily was eager to see it when I arrived at the venue. As the ceremony started, everything went off without a hitch. Jake and Emily exchanged their vows. The crowd teared up at the beautiful moments, and I stood there trying not to cry too. The reception afterward was full of laughter, dancing, and all the typical wedding shenanigans. Everything was going so smoothly. I felt like the hero of the day for helping out with the champagne. Emily had asked me to deliver the bottle to the bar staff when the reception started so that they could open it and serve it to guests. I was more than happy to oblige, feeling a sense of pride as I walked over to the bar with the bottle in my hand. I handed it over to the bartender and casually said, "Hey, this is for Emily. It's her special champagne. She's been talking about it for weeks, so make sure it gets served to her and Jake later tonight." The bartender smiled and nodded, taking the bottle from me. I walked away, feeling like I had just completed another heroic task. And then the party really got going. People were dancing, eating, and drinking, but I was keeping my eye on Emily and Jake, waiting for the big moment when they would open the special champagne and share a toast. I figured it would be a touching moment. Emily would probably cry, and Jake would give her one of those goofy grins, and it would be the highlight of the night. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something strange. There was a noticeable lack of attention being paid to the bottle of champagne I had so carefully delivered. It wasn't even on the table where I had expected it to be. I wasn't worried at first, but after a while, I started to get a little suspicious. Where had it gone? Had the bartender opened it already? Was it already served? I went up to the bar and asked the bartender, "Hey, where's the bottle of champagne I brought in?" Emily and Jake were really looking forward to it. The bartender gave me a strange look. I opened that bottle earlier. It's been served to a couple of guests." My heart sank. "What?" "Yeah, someone requested champagne, and we had no more left, so I just opened it. I figured it was just another bottle." My mind was racing. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what had happened. That rare vintage champagne was not meant for random guests at the bar. That was the bottle Emily had been obsessing over for weeks. She had wanted it to be a special moment between her and Jake. But I had made the rookie mistake of not making sure the bartender knew it was something special. I had delivered it like it was any other bottle of bubbly. I tried to salvage the situation by telling the bartender to go find out who got it, but it was already too late. The damage was done. I could already hear Emily's voice in my head as she realized her prized champagne was gone. The reception continued, but I was in a state of pure panic. Every time I saw Emily or Jake laughing and enjoying themselves, I imagined how they'd react when they found out the champagne had been served to someone else. I was desperately trying to think of a way to undo what I'd done, but there was no fixing it. I had ruined it, the one task I was entrusted with, and I had messed it up. The night dragged on, and I didn't have the heart to tell Emily what happened until the very end, when she and Jake were about to leave. As I walked up to her, I could already see the sadness in her eyes, and I knew it was coming. I sheepishly told her what had happened, and she went silent for a moment. Her face shifted from sadness to a mixture of confusion and anger. Jake, bless his heart, tried to calm her down, but Emily looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was the face of someone who had just realized her dream wedding was slightly tainted by a careless mistake. She didn't scream at me, but I could tell she was disappointed. It wasn't the champagne she cared about. It was the thought behind it. I had completely botched it. Looking back on it now, I know it was an honest mistake, but in that moment, I felt like I had failed my best friend. I had ruined the one thing that could have been a perfect memory. In the end, they still got married, they still had a great time, and I'm sure they'll remember the wedding for all the right reasons. But I'll always remember the day I ruined the wedding champagne. TIFU by accidentally sending my ex a nude that I thought I was sending to my girlfriend. I thought I had mastered the art of modern technology. After all, I was a millennial. Social media, texting, sending memes, and emojis were second nature to me. I had it all figured out, or so I thought. But, as with most things in life, I learned the hard way that sometimes technology will expose you in the most embarrassing way possible. It all started on a random Tuesday evening. I had just wrapped up a long day at work and was finally looking forward to unwinding. My girlfriend and I had been in a steady relationship for over a year, and things were going great. She lived a few hours away, and we both agreed that we'd keep the spark alive by sending each other flirty texts and the occasional nudes. We were a relatively open couple, so the routine of sending each other explicit photos was just a part of how we kept things exciting. That night, I had just finished showering after hitting the gym and was feeling pretty good about myself. It had been a while since I'd taken a selfie of my newly sculpted body, so I decided to snap a picture in the mirror. I wasn't doing it for anyone in particular, but I had recently started sending some more intimate shots to my girlfriend. I thought, why not? She'll appreciate this. I wasn't the type to usually send anything too risque, but that night, I felt bold. I snapped a picture of myself in the bathroom mirror, flexing my muscles in a way that made me feel like a gym bro. In hindsight, the angle was a bit much, but in the heat of the moment, I thought it looked pretty impressive. The bathroom light cast a soft glow over my body, and I was proud of the effort I had put into getting in shape. Now, the part where I mess up begins. For the sake of clarity, I need to explain that I had two separate messaging apps. One for personal conversations and one for more private communication with my girlfriend. The apps were color-coded differently, so I didn't have any trouble distinguishing between them. But as it turns out, my mind wasn't as sharp as I thought it was. I opened my texting app, saw my girlfriend's name at the top of the list, and thought, okay, time to send her this shot. She'll love it. I attached the photo and started typing out a cute, flirty message to go along with it. Something like, "Miss you, babe. Hope this makes you smile." With the message ready, I hit send. The only problem? I wasn't sending it to my girlfriend at all. It wasn't until about 10 minutes later, when I received an unread message notification from her, that I realized the awful truth. But it wasn't from her. The message had come from someone I hadn't heard from in months, my ex. Yes, the very same ex I had broken up with after a messy and emotional split about 6 months ago. The same ex who had recently tried to reach out to me a few times, asking how I was doing, but I had completely ignored because I didn't want to reignite any kind of communication. I froze. I stared at the screen in utter disbelief, my heart racing. I scrolled up through the message history to see when our last conversation was. To my horror, it was just a few weeks ago. She had messaged me about some random thing that I had completely overlooked. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. I had somehow managed to send the nude photo, intended for my girlfriend, to my ex instead. For a few moments, I had no idea how to react. Should I apologize and explain? Should I pretend like it was an accident and move on with my life? Should I delete the photo before she saw it? None of these options felt like they would spare me the humiliation. I stared at the screen, my palms sweaty, the realization dawning on me that there was no easy way out of this. After a few seconds of sheer panic, I decided to take the coward's route. I opened up my messages with my ex and started typing a message, attempting to cover my tracks. "Hey, sorry about that. That was meant for someone else. I didn't mean to send that to you, my bad." I figured a quick apology was better than nothing, but it wasn't exactly going to undo the damage. But just as I was about to hit send, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from my ex. My stomach dropped. She had already seen the photo. I opened the message, bracing myself for the worst, and there it was, "Is this really you? Wow, didn't know we were back to sending nudes again." It was like a punch to the gut. She was making light of it, but I could tell she was genuinely surprised. And why wouldn't she be? We hadn't been in touch for months, and now, here I was, sending her an unsolicited nude photo. My brain scrambled to think of an excuse, but there was no graceful way out of this. My only hope was that she'd just laugh it off and pretend it never happened. So I replied, Yeah, sorry about that. Really didn't mean to send that your way. Please just ignore it. Her response came quickly. I mean, it's flattering, I guess. But maybe next time, just make sure you know who you're sending it to. Not sure how I feel about being your accidental target. It was a blow to my pride, but honestly, I was relieved it hadn't turned into something worse. The last thing I wanted was for my ex to think that I was trying to get back together or rekindle any kind of relationship. The whole point of sending that photo to my girlfriend was to maintain the spark between us, not to reignite anything with my ex. I nervously glanced at my phone, waiting for my ex to escalate the conversation or make things more awkward, but thankfully, she didn't. After a few minutes, she just responded with, "Anyway, hope things are good with you. Take care." It seemed like she wasn't going to dwell on it, and honestly, I was relieved. As for my girlfriend, I knew I had to come clean. I didn't want to hide it from her, so I immediately sent her a message explaining what had happened. I told her the truth, that I had accidentally sent the photo to my ex instead of her, and that it was a total accident. To my surprise, she was really understanding about it. She actually laughed when I told her the story, and she reassured me that it wasn't a big deal. But, needless to say, I promised her I'd be more careful in the future. So here I am, sharing this embarrassing moment with all of you. I may have tried to play it cool, but I've learned the hard way that sending nudes can backfire in ways you never expect. Technology is a double-edged sword, and if you're not careful, it can easily get you in trouble. But on the bright side, I don't think I'll ever forget the lesson. Always double-check who you're sending pictures to. Moral of the story? Never send anything you wouldn't want your ex, or anyone else, to see. And always double-check your recipient before hitting send. TIFU by accidentally breaking into my neighbor's house. So, this happened just last week, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm not the most socially adept person, and as an introvert, I tend to avoid social gatherings, especially when they involve interacting with strangers. But it was just a regular Thursday when something very, very unexpected happened. I think I've officially hit a new level of awkwardness that I never thought was even possible. Let me take you through the chain of events that led to me breaking into my neighbor's house. I live in a fairly quiet suburban neighborhood, where the houses are close enough to be neighborly, but not so close that it feels uncomfortable. I've lived here for a little over a year, so I'm familiar with the neighborhood and the general layout. But I've only ever talked to my next-door neighbors a handful of times, mostly about the usual polite stuff. "Hey, how are you?" Or, "Your dog looks adorable." Nothing substantial. One Thursday morning, I woke up to a missed call from a friend. I had been out late the night before, and I wasn't in the mood to deal with phone calls, so I ignored it. A couple of hours later, I finally checked the voicemail. It was my friend calling to remind me about our plans that night. We were supposed to meet at his place for a small get-together. I had completely forgotten about it. I'm usually not the best at keeping track of social plans, and honestly, I wasn't feeling it. But I'd already committed, so I reluctantly decided I'd go. It was about 3:30 p.m., and I still had a couple of hours before I needed to leave for my friend's house. I figured I'd kill some time by doing a little cleaning around the house. I had this pile of laundry I'd been meaning to sort through, so I started on that. As I was putting away clothes, I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. There was a key on the front porch. It wasn't mine, and I had never seen it before. I thought about it for a moment, wondering if it had fallen out of my bag or if I had accidentally left it there the night before. But no, it definitely wasn't mine. It was a small, old-fashioned brass key, the kind that's used for old wooden doors. I checked around my yard, and there was no one in sight. It was odd. So, I picked it up, thinking maybe it had been left by the previous owners of the house or someone else who lived nearby. It didn't seem like something I should just leave lying around, so I took it inside and set it down on my kitchen counter. Later that afternoon, around 5 p.m., I decided to take a walk. I often take walks to clear my head, so I grabbed my headphones and started strolling through the neighborhood. As I was walking, I happened to pass by my neighbor's house. They lived 2 doors down from me, and I've never really interacted with them much. The only thing I knew about them was that they had a young child and that they worked long hours, so they were rarely home. That's when I noticed something strange. Their front door was wide open. This wasn't normal. I had never seen the door open before, and I knew they weren't home. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the best of me. I walked up to the front porch to see if anyone was there. As I approached, I saw a shadow through the window. I assumed maybe they had a housekeeper or a friend visiting. But then, my eyes landed on something that made my heart skip a beat, the brass key. The one I had found earlier. It was lying on the ground, right in front of their door. I stood frozen for a few moments, trying to make sense of it all. Why was the door open? Why was the key here? It was like everything was pointing to me that the key was for this house. I don't know why, but in that moment, my brain just clicked into overdrive. It was like the key was supposed to fit, and I just knew that I needed to do something with it. I guess part of me thought that maybe I could lock the door for them, so they wouldn't get robbed or something. It wasn't like it was an emergency, but the whole thing just felt wrong. I've seen enough movies to know that doors shouldn't just be left open like that. So, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to try the key in the door. I walked up to the front door and carefully inserted the brass key into the lock. It turned with ease, and the door opened without a sound. I froze for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob. There was no one inside, but that was exactly what was so strange about it. Why would the door be unlocked, yet no one be home? It just didn't make sense. Before I could process what I had just done, I heard footsteps coming from inside. Panic shot through me. I quickly stepped back, but I didn't want to look suspicious. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but I had no idea what to do. So, I just froze there, standing on the porch like a deer in headlights. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard a voice from inside. "Hello, is anyone out there?" I didn't know what to do. I was too far into the situation to back out now. I awkwardly mumbled something like, just making sure everything's okay. "Your door was open." The voice responded, "Wait, what?" My door was open. At that moment, I heard a soft click from inside, and then the door swung open fully. Standing there was my neighbor. She looked just as confused as I felt. Who are you?" she asked, squinting at me like she was trying to figure out if I was a burglar or if she just didn't recognize me. I quickly explained that I had found a key on my porch earlier in the day, and I just wanted to make sure her door was locked. But before I could finish my explanation, she interrupted me. "That key, that's my spare key. I lost it a few days ago. But why were you trying to use it on my door?" I stared at her for a moment, realizing just how insane the situation sounded. In my attempt to be helpful, I had, in fact, just broken into her house. Not only had I used her key without permission, but I had also made it look like I was snooping around. The worst part? She just started laughing. And not a friendly laugh. More like a nervous, "I can't believe you actually did this" laugh. "I can't believe this just happened," she said, shaking her head. "You've got some nerve, man." I tried to apologize, but honestly, nothing I said made it better. Eventually, she just asked me to leave, which I did. I walked back to my house, feeling mortified and wondering how on earth I had ended up in such an absurd situation. Moral of the story: sometimes, when you find something that doesn't belong to you, it's best to leave it alone. And if you think your neighbor's house might be open, don't go assuming that it's an invitation to walk in and make yourself at home. That's not how you make friends. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire in my new apartment while trying to cook dinner for the first time. So, this is one of those I didn't think it was possible to mess up something so simple, but here we are, kind of stories. For context, I'm a 28-year-old guy who just moved into my first apartment by myself. I've lived in a couple of dorms and shared places with roommates, but this is my first solo venture into adult living. It's been an exciting few weeks, setting up furniture, decorating the space, and figuring out how to actually do life on my own. I was feeling pretty good about it, but what happened last night completely shattered that illusion. I'm not exactly a culinary expert. Growing up, my mom did most of the cooking, and when I lived with roommates, we usually just order takeout. I mean, I can make a mean peanut butter sandwich, and I've boiled pasta once or twice, but I've never actually cooked a full meal by myself. I decided last night will be the night I changed that. I thought about making something simple like spaghetti and meatballs, but I quickly remembered that I'd probably need a few more kitchen skills to pull that off, and I didn't want to risk burning anything. Instead, I figured I'd start with something easy: grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple, right? I mean, it's basically impossible to mess up. I could toast some bread, slap some cheese between it, and call it a day. I had watched enough YouTube videos to feel confident in my skills, so I wasn't worried. I even bought the pre-made soup from a can, so that part would be easy. I gathered my ingredients: bread, butter, cheese, and a can of tomato soup. I set everything out on the counter, and that's when I realized something important. I had no idea how to use the stove. I mean, I know how to turn it on, but I'd never really cooked on one before. The stove in my new apartment was one of those fancy glass-top electric ones, and the buttons looked like they were from the future. There were no knobs like I was used to, just a series of confusing buttons with pictures of flames and temperature numbers. After spending a few minutes trying to figure out the buttons, I finally turned the stove onto a low setting and put a pan on it. I figured I'd give it a few minutes to heat up while I made the sandwich. I spread butter on the bread, slapped the cheese on, and was feeling pretty proud of myself for actually getting this far. At this point, I put the pan on the stove and began to cook the sandwich. This is where things started going wrong. The pan was on the stove for what felt like an eternity, but I didn't know how long it needed to heat up before the bread would toast. I figured a few minutes would be fine, but then I started to notice that the pan was making a weird smell. At first, I thought it was just the butter, so I shrugged it off and kept flipping the sandwich. But then the smell got stronger, kind of a burnt smell. I looked at the pan and realized that the bread was starting to char. I panicked. I wasn't sure if I should flip it or if I should just take the pan off the heat. My brain was going a million miles a minute, trying to figure out the right move. I flipped the sandwich anyway, and that's when things escalated quickly. The other side of the bread immediately started to blacken and emit thick smoke. I figured I should move the pan off the stove, but I wasn't sure where to put it. I didn't have a trivet or anything to rest the hot pan on, so I set it down on the countertop. The smoke was now pouring out of the sandwich, and the kitchen was starting to fill up with a haze. Panicking further, I grabbed a spatula and tried to scrape the sandwich off the pan to rescue it, but as I did, I heard a faint crackling sound. I looked at the pan, and to my horror, there were actual flames licking the sides. The butter in the pan had caught fire. I froze for a second. I've never had to deal with fire before, especially not in my own apartment. The fire was small at first, just a flicker, but it spread quickly, and I realized I needed to do something fast. I did what any panic-stricken person would do. I screamed like a little girl and ran into the living room. I mean, I know you're supposed to stay calm in emergencies, but at that moment, my fight-or-flight response kicked in, and running away from the fire seemed like the best option. I stood there, staring at the kitchen from the doorway, unsure what to do. My heart was racing, and I was sweating. I don't know why, but I thought I should call my mom. So I did. I dialed her number as I watched my kitchen go up in flames. She picked up. "Mom, help. I started a fire in my apartment. What do I do?" She didn't respond immediately. I could tell she was trying to process the situation. Finally, she said, "What? What happened?" "I was making grilled cheese, and I don't know what went wrong. There's a fire on the stove. What do I do?" I could hear her sigh deeply on the other end, probably realizing her 28-year-old son was a complete disaster in the kitchen. She calmly walked me through what to do, starting with turning off the stove and removing the pan from the burner. I did both things as quickly as I could, but the fire wasn't out yet. So she told me to grab the nearest towel, wet it, and smother the flames. I didn't have a wet towel on hand, but I did have a dishcloth that was sitting on the counter. I ran over to it, dunked it in the sink, and tossed it over the pan. The fire sizzled out almost immediately. I stood there, staring at the charred remains of my grilled cheese and the blackened pan, utterly defeated. I thanked my mom profusely and hung up the phone. The kitchen still smelled like burnt bread, and I had no idea what to do next. I opened all the windows to air out the smoke and spent the next hour cleaning the soot off the stovetop. My once pristine kitchen now looked like a war zone. In the end, I had to throw out the sandwich because it was beyond redemption, and the tomato soup? I completely forgot about it. It was sitting there unopened on the counter while I was panicking over the fire. So, yeah, that's the story of how I accidentally started a fire in my new apartment while trying to make grilled cheese and tomato soup. I don't know what's more embarrassing, the fact that I almost burned down my place over a simple meal or that I had to call my mom for help. I'm definitely sticking to takeout for the foreseeable future. TIFU by accidentally getting my boss fired, then trying to cover it up in the worst possible way. So a little background. I've been working at this company for almost 3 years now. It's a small but fast-growing marketing agency, and I'm just an ordinary account manager. I'm not important by any means, but I do a good job, and things have been pretty smooth. That is, until this one very fateful day. It all started when my boss, Greg, called me into his office one morning. Now, Greg is a good guy, but he's not the most organized person in the world. He's always running around like a chicken with his head cut off, and I kind of feel like I end up doing a lot of the legwork for him. That said, I always try to help him out because, well, he's my boss. But that doesn't mean I wasn't starting to get a little tired of it. On this particular day, Greg asked me to handle a few client accounts that weren't exactly my responsibility. The reason he gave was that he was preparing for an important meeting with a potential big client that afternoon, and he couldn't afford any distractions. I agreed, figuring I would just knock out these tasks quickly and go back to my regular duties. Now, here's where things start to go south. One of the tasks he gave me was to send a set of analytics reports to a client that had been asking for them for weeks. Simple enough, right? Well, Greg had given me the wrong contact information. I didn't realize this at first, and after finishing up the report, I shot off the email to the client. It wasn't until an hour later that I got an angry phone call from the client. Apparently, the email I sent was addressed to the wrong person, and it had confidential information about their competitors. This was bad. I mean, really bad. Not only had I just messed up a major client relationship, but the email also contained sensitive data that was not supposed to leave our company. The client was livid, and I could feel my stomach drop as I frantically apologized. The last thing I wanted was to be responsible for the company's reputation being trashed. But at this point, there was no turning back. The damage was done. Here's where the real mess began. I decided to immediately tell Greg what happened. Now, you'd think that a boss would be understanding, but no. Greg flipped out. He couldn't believe I made such a basic mistake. He immediately started drafting a long-winded apology to the client, trying to smooth things over. In the meantime, I was in full-on panic mode, trying to think of ways to salvage the situation. I tried to help Greg by suggesting we call the client and apologize, but Greg was adamant that the email would be enough. He didn't even want me to speak to the client directly. That should have been my first red flag. So I sat there for what felt like hours, watching Greg scramble to draft an apology email. And let me tell you, it was bad. It was so bad that I felt a little embarrassed for him. The email was unprofessional, full of rambling excuses, and it didn't even apologize properly. It was as if he was more concerned about covering his own ass than actually fixing the problem. I suggested he rewrite it, but he refused. I was getting more and more anxious, and before I knew it, I'd done something incredibly stupid. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went into Greg's office and asked if I could send a second email. He looked at me like I was crazy, but after some convincing, he reluctantly agreed. I used his original apology as a template, but I totally rewrote it. I took out all the excuses, kept it professional, and even added a small gift voucher for a future service to try to smooth things over with the client. I thought it was a brilliant move. I really did. I knew I'd probably made things worse earlier, but I felt like I could fix it with this one simple act of redemption. The email got sent, and the client responded quickly. They seemed to be placated by the apology and the gesture, and I thought that was that. Crisis averted, right? Wrong. The next day, Greg was called into a meeting with the higher-ups. They didn't tell him exactly what the meeting was about, but by the look on his face when he came out, I knew something was off. He pulled me into his office and shut the door behind us. "Did you rewrite that email?" Greg asked, his face red with anger. I tried to play it cool. "Yeah, I did. I thought it needed a bit more of a personal touch. I mean, no offense, but the first one was a little weak." Greg looked at me like I had just kicked his dog. "You got to be kidding me. They're firing me, aren't they?" I didn't know how to respond. I didn't think it would go that far. Sure, I messed up, but I thought I'd made it right. Apparently, Greg had forgotten to CC a few key people in the email, and when the higher-ups read the apology I sent, they were furious. They felt that I had overstepped and bypassed Greg's authority, undermining his leadership. And honestly, I kind of had. I was trying to fix my own screw-up, but in doing so, I just made things worse for him. Greg had to sit through a performance review, and it ended with him being told that he was no longer the right fit for the company. And while I had absolutely no idea that my actions would lead to his firing, I felt a gnawing sense of guilt. I could tell Greg was crushed. He had been at the company for years, and now he was gone, all because of my attempt to cover up a stupid mistake. I never thought that one small action, sending one email, would cause such a snowball effect. And to make things worse, Greg was let go in a really public manner. Everyone at the office was talking about it, and I just couldn't escape the feeling that it was all my fault. In the weeks that followed, the company seemed to spiral. The higher-ups didn't take kindly to me either, and I got a lot of sideways glances from my coworkers. I tried my best to do my work and avoid the subject, but no one ever mentioned Greg again, as if he'd never been there. The entire ordeal left me wondering if I could ever redeem myself from the disaster I'd created. To this day, I still don't know what would have happened if I had just let Greg handle the situation himself. If I had just swallowed my pride and accepted the blame, maybe none of this would have happened. But instead, I tried to fix a problem that wasn't mine to fix, and it cost someone their job. So yeah, TIFU by trying to fix my own mistake and ending up getting my boss fired. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and accidentally setting off the fire alarm in my entire apartment building. So this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still trying to live it down. You know when you have that one idea in your head that feels perfect and you're so sure it'll work out, but then everything goes completely wrong in every way possible? Yeah, that was me. I decided to surprise my girlfriend, Laura, with a special dinner. We had been together for a while, and I wanted to do something nice for her. We'd been going through a bit of a stressful time. Work had been crazy for both of us, and I just felt like we hadn't spent enough quality time together lately. I thought a romantic homemade dinner would be the perfect way to reconnect. I was determined to make it memorable. You know, the kind of dinner where the candles are set just right, the music is soft in the background, and everything is perfect. I had a plan. A great plan, if I do say so myself. I had watched a few YouTube videos, read some recipes, and made a shopping list. I was going to cook her favorite dish, chicken Alfredo with homemade garlic bread. Simple, but comforting and delicious. I figured I'd set the table in our little dining area with some candles, a few flowers, and maybe some soft jazz in the background. I even bought a bottle of wine to complete the vibe. I thought I had it all under control. But, as anyone who's ever tried to cook a nice meal under pressure knows, that's when everything starts going sideways. First, I made the mistake of trying to cook everything at once. I had the chicken on the stove, the pasta boiling, the garlic bread in the oven, and I was juggling between them like a circus performer. To make things worse, I had the heat cranked up a little too high because I was in a rush. The chicken was starting to sizzle aggressively, and I could smell that distinct something's burning smell. But I was trying to play it cool, telling myself, it's fine, I've got this. Next, my neighbor, Greg, from across the hall, who I've always thought was a little too friendly, decided that tonight was the perfect time to come over and ask if I had any spare eggs. You know, normal neighbor stuff, right? Except I was already stressed, and the last thing I needed was Greg knocking on my door with his whole, "Hey, I ran out of eggs, and I'm making pancakes" story. But I was trying to be nice, so I let him in while I was frantically stirring the sauce and flipping the chicken. The moment Greg stepped into my apartment, I noticed he was holding a bottle of hot sauce, and he casually mentioned that he'd been experimenting with different kinds of sauces. Before I could stop him, he walked over to the stove, leaned in, and shook a generous amount of his homemade hot sauce into the Alfredo sauce without even asking me if I was okay with it. He didn't even wait for me to say anything, and by the time I could protest, the deed was done. I was shocked, but I didn't want to start an argument with him, so I just gave a nervous laugh and said, "All right, cool. I guess we're going spicy tonight." I should have kicked him out, but I didn't. I was too focused on trying to salvage the meal. Now, here's where things get even worse. While I was trying to figure out how to save the sauce from Greg's hot sauce experiment, I heard a loud, piercing beep from the kitchen. I turned around just in time to see the smoke starting to billow from the garlic bread in the oven. Apparently, I had forgotten about it in my chaotic rush to handle the chicken and sauce. In a panic, I ran to the oven and opened it up, but it was too late. The bread was blackened, charred beyond recognition. The smoke was now filling the entire apartment, and the kitchen was an absolute disaster. I had ruined the bread, but I didn't have time to dwell on that because the smoke alarm started going off, and it was deafening. By this point, Greg had decided that it was a good time to take a seat at the table, completely oblivious to the fact that my kitchen was about to erupt into flames. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, and that's when the situation really escalated. I hit the fire extinguisher's nozzle, but instead of a gentle puff of foam, it blasted out with such force that it sent a cloud of white powder everywhere. I was coughing and trying to see through the fog, but I couldn't stop the cloud from engulfing the whole room. As I looked around, I realized I just covered not only the kitchen, but the entire dining room in this white mess. And as if things weren't bad enough, the fire alarm went off again. This time, louder and more frantic, probably because I had set off the apartment building's fire system. I rushed to open the windows to let out the smoke, but it was too late. I could hear the sound of fire trucks approaching. The sirens got louder, and I realized that I had just called the entire fire department to my apartment. In the chaos, Greg, being the helpful guy he is, had just stepped out onto the balcony to watch the scene unfold. Apparently, he thought this was all some kind of event happening, like a live-action reality show. He was even snapping photos and making whoa noises as he watched the fire trucks pull up. At this point, Laura had just arrived home, and she opened the door to see not only the flashing red lights outside, but also the firemen in full gear walking into my apartment. I'll never forget the look on her face. She was in shock, asking me what the hell was going on. I couldn't even come up with a coherent sentence. All I could do was stand there in the middle of the chaos, covered in flour and sauce, with a fire extinguisher in one hand and an almost burnt chicken in the other. The firemen were very kind about it, but they had to do their job. They made sure everything was safe, but I was mortified. By the time they left, half the building had evacuated, and the entire place smelled like smoke and fire extinguisher powder. As you might imagine, the dinner was a complete disaster. I had to apologize profusely to Laura for what should have been a romantic night, but instead turned into an unintentional emergency response drill. Greg, of course, took the opportunity to make sure everyone knew that he was the guy with the hot sauce. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Never cook a fancy meal when you're stressed. Don't let Greg into your apartment unless you're prepared for him to make questionable decisions. And maybe, just maybe, set up a fire drill before attempting something that involved an open flame, a hot stove, and a fire extinguisher in a small apartment. TIFU by accidentally sending a love letter to my boss instead of my girlfriend. This is a bit embarrassing, and I still can't believe it happened. I've been working in my current job for about 2 years now, and things were going great. I had a solid relationship with my colleagues, and for the most part, a great working environment. But one night, after a couple of glasses of wine, I made a pretty big mistake that I'm sure will haunt me for the rest of my life. So, let's rewind a little bit. I've been dating my girlfriend, Sarah, for about 6 months now. Things are going really well, and she was absolutely incredible. I was really smitten, and I'd often find myself thinking about her even when I was at work. We were at that stage where we'd spend hours texting each other during the day, making little jokes, sending memes, and sharing random thoughts. I wanted to write her something special to show how much she meant to me, so I decided to write her a heartfelt letter. Nothing crazy, just a nice, genuine letter expressing how much I appreciated her and how lucky I felt to have her in my life. It was late one Friday night, and I was sitting in my living room, having just finished a long week at work. I had a glass of wine in hand and was feeling pretty relaxed. I opened my laptop and started typing out this letter to Sarah. I poured my heart into it, writing about how I admired her strength, her intelligence, her sense of humor, and all the little things she did that made my life better. I wrote about how I was looking forward to our future together, how I loved the way she made me feel, and how I couldn't imagine life without her by my side. It was the kind of letter you'd expect to read in a rom-com. Once I was done, I read it over a few times, making sure it sounded just right. I wanted it to be perfect. I'd already taken a picture of the letter with my phone earlier in the week to surprise her with it. So, I decided to email it to her, attaching the file, and went about opening my email client. I have 2 email accounts, one for work and one for personal stuff. I often get the two confused, but I'm usually pretty careful to double-check everything. This time, I wasn't as careful as I should have been. Instead of opening my personal email, I opened my work account. The window had a bunch of tabs open from earlier in the day, and I didn't think anything of it. I attached the file, which was titled loveandveteran.docs, and typed a quick subject line. For you, my love. Then, I began typing the message in the body of the email. I wrote, I've been thinking about you all week, and I wanted to share something I've been working on. I hope you like it. As I hit send, I sat back satisfied. I was already imagining how Sarah would react when she received it. I was so excited that I didn't even bother to double-check who I'd sent it to. But then, within a couple of minutes, I received a response. It was from my boss. At first, I thought I might have sent the email to the wrong person. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Hi, my name. I'm not sure what this is about, but I don't think this email was meant for me. Is everything okay? If you need to talk about anything, I'm here. But please be more careful with what you're sending to who in the future. Best. Boss's name. I just sat there, frozen. I stared at the email, my mind racing. No way. No way did I just do that. For a split second, I considered pretending like I had meant to send it to my boss, but that would have been ridiculous. It was clear that I had accidentally sent my very personal, mushy love letter to my boss instead of Sarah. And the worst part? My boss had already read it. He probably even shared it with HR or someone else by now. What kind of message was I sending to my superior? I quickly opened my sent folder, and my heart sank as I saw the email in my outbox. There it was plain as day, loveandveteran.docs sent to boss_name@company.com. I wanted to crawl under a rock and disappear. It didn't take long for my phone to buzz. It was Sarah. Hey, I just got your email. What's this about? My stomach twisted. I could only imagine what she thought when she opened it. I had worked so hard on that letter, and now it was completely ruined. She probably thought I was losing my mind or getting too intense too quickly. I didn't even know what to say. I thought about texting her back something casual, but I didn't want to lie either. So, I decided to come clean. I sent her a message that read, Babe, I messed up. I sent the letter to the wrong person. Please don't think I'm crazy. I meant to send that to you, but I accidentally sent it to my boss instead. I'm so sorry if that's weird. I waited and waited. Finally, she responded with a laughing emoji and a message. OMG, you seriously just sent that to your boss? That's hilarious. I'll try not to judge you too hard, but I'm definitely laughing. I was relieved she didn't take it too seriously. But still, I knew that the damage was done. I had sent a very intimate message to the wrong person, and no amount of explaining could change that. The next morning at work, I was dreading seeing my boss. I had no idea how he'd react. Would he bring it up? Would he mention it in front of everyone? Would he just make it awkward? I walked into the office with my head down, hoping to avoid any conversation about it. But of course, my boss was right there when I walked in. To my surprise, he didn't mention it at all. In fact, he acted like nothing had happened. He greeted me like normal, and I felt like maybe I had dodged a bullet. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if he was going to bring it up at a later time. It turned out, though, that he never said a word about it again. I guess he was as embarrassed as I was. As for Sarah, we ended up laughing about it for weeks. She thought it was funny, and eventually, I wrote her a new love letter, this time making sure to triple-check the recipient before hitting send. TIFU by accidentally ruining my best friend's wedding, and it all started with a text. It's a Saturday afternoon, and I'm sitting on my couch, scrolling through Instagram like any other person avoiding life's responsibilities. I check my messages and see a new notification from my best friend, Rachel. She's been engaged to Greg for over a year, and after months of planning, her wedding is only a few days away. Rachel and I have been best friends since high school. We've been through everything together. Bad dates, breakups, hangovers, and even the tragic death of her dog, Fluffy. It felt like nothing could come between us, but I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The text was a simple one, but one that I wasn't prepared for. It said, hey, just wanted to double check. You're still coming to the wedding, right? Now, I should have responded with something like, of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world. But I was deep into a social media rabbit hole and barely reading the text when I typed my response. Instead, I replied with a very casual, yeah, I'll be there. Can't wait to see you in that dress. By the way, I'm so glad you're not marrying Greg. Now, let me explain. I've been friends with Greg for a long time, too. He's a great guy, but Rachel and Greg's relationship had been on the rocks for months. As her best friend, I'd been listening to all of her complaints about him, his annoying habits, and how they constantly argued about every little thing. I wasn't the only one who had concerns. Others in the friend group had been talking behind her back about whether or not she was truly happy with him. But I never meant to send that message. I just didn't think. My mind was preoccupied, and the words just slipped out. It's the sort of thing you think in the back of your head, but would never actually say aloud. I immediately realized my mistake as soon as I hit send. Oh no, I muttered aloud, panicking. I quickly opened the message again, preparing to delete it, but before I could, Rachel responded, "What do you mean you're glad I'm not marrying Greg?" At that moment, I froze. This was it. My friendship with Rachel was on the line. It wasn't like I had just insulted her dress choice or said her choice of flowers was ugly. I'd made an insensitive comment about her fiancé, a comment that could be interpreted as me questioning her relationship and the choices she was about to make for the rest of her life. I had to fix this, and I had to fix it fast. I tried to salvage the situation with a quick follow-up text. "Wait, no, I didn't mean it like that. What I meant was, I'm glad you're marrying Greg because I know he's the one for you." It was weak, but I hoped it would somehow smooth things over. She didn't respond immediately, but my phone buzzed a few minutes later. My stomach sank when I saw her message. "I need some space. We'll talk later." My heart skipped a beat. Space? Was she breaking up with me? What about the wedding? I thought about calling her, but I knew better. At this point, no words could fix what I had done. I made a mess of things, and I wasn't sure if anything could undo the damage. I spent the next few days in a constant state of dread. I tried to focus on my work, but every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Rachel. It wasn't. It was just random texts from coworkers or spam notifications, but my mind kept racing back to Rachel. I thought about sending her a phone call or a long message begging for forgiveness, but nothing seemed like it would work. The day of the wedding arrived, and I felt physically ill. It wasn't just the anxiety. It was the idea that I might lose my best friend over one stupid message. I convinced myself that I should just go, suck it up, and maybe Rachel would come around. I showed up at the venue, trying to act casual and not let anyone see how freaked out I was. I wore a nice dress, one I had bought months ago for the occasion, but felt like it was suffocating me. The air in the room was thick with tension, and I could tell that everyone was on edge. Rachel wasn't in the bridal suite when I got there, and I saw Greg standing alone, looking lost and confused. I walked up to him, giving him a polite smile. "Hey, Greg, you good?" "Yeah, I guess," he said, his face showing the strain of the whole situation. "I haven't heard from Rachel yet today. She hasn't responded to my texts." That's when I knew something had gone terribly wrong. Rachel had gone radio silent. The message that I had sent her had somehow spiraled into something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. I was no longer just dealing with an awkward conversation between friends. I was witnessing a potentially disastrous situation for a wedding that had taken months of preparation. "Where's Rachel?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know. She was supposed to be here an hour ago, but I don't know," Greg replied, his eyes filled with confusion. "Have you talked to her?" I wanted to lie, to say something that would make it seem like I hadn't just ruined everything, but the truth had to come out eventually. "Look, I kind of messed up with her. I sent a text earlier this week, and it didn't come out the way I intended. She got really upset." Greg's eyes widened in realization. "Oh no, are you serious?" "I didn't mean it." I quickly added, "It was a stupid mistake. I tried to fix it, but I think I might have made it worse. I think she's seriously pissed at me." That's when Greg's face shifted into something that can only be described as panic mode. He started pacing around the room, muttering to himself, and I could see him grabbing his phone again, texting Rachel furiously. "Maybe I should go," I said, my heart breaking for both of them. "I don't want to make this worse." Greg grabbed my arm before I could leave. "Wait, no. You've been best friends for years. You need to fix this. You need to talk to her. It's not too late." I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I made my way to the bathroom. I dialed Rachel's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left her a message, no, a plea, begging for forgiveness, saying I was so sorry and that I never meant to hurt her. I told her how much I loved her and how I couldn't stand the idea of her walking down the aisle without me there. When I got back into the main hall, I saw Rachel walking in with her mother. She looked beautiful, but her face was clouded with frustration. When she saw me, she froze. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but I couldn't find the words. She walked up to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I got your message," she said quietly. "I think I need a minute to process this." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. The wedding went on. The ceremony was beautiful, but the entire time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had ruined everything. I was just hoping that, somehow, Rachel and I could repair this. I didn't know what the future held, but I would do whatever it took to make it right. So, yeah, that's how I almost ruined my best friend's wedding with one stupid text. TIFU, by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and accidentally setting the kitchen on fire. So, I decided to plan a surprise for my girlfriend, Sarah. We've been together for almost a year, and I wanted to do something special for her, something to show her just how much she means to me. I'm not the most creative or extravagant guy, but I figured I could at least try my hand at cooking and make her a nice dinner. She always talks about how she loves a good home-cooked meal, so I thought this would be a great opportunity to impress her. I spent the whole day prepping. I went to the store in the morning to get everything I needed for what I was planning to make, a nice, classic 3-course meal. I had the appetizer, bruschetta, the main course, seared steak with mashed potatoes and green beans, and dessert, chocolate lava cakes. I even bought a nice bottle of wine to set the mood. I'm not exactly Gordon Ramsay, but I figured, how hard could it be? I decided to set everything up while she was out with her friends. She told me she was going to be gone for a few hours, which gave me plenty of time to prepare the meal and make the apartment look cozy. I set the table with candles, put on some soft music, and even got a few flowers to place in the center. I was going all out. I thought, this is going to be perfect. I started with the bruschetta. Easy enough. Chop up some tomatoes, garlic, and basil, mix it all together, and serve it on some toasted baguette slices. Nothing could go wrong with that, right? I was feeling good about myself at this point. Then, it was time to start the steak. Now, I've grilled steaks before, but searing them in a pan was a different beast. I knew I had to get the pan really hot, but I didn't realize just how hot. I preheated the pan for a solid 10 minutes, as the recipe said, to get it almost smoking. I seasoned the steaks, placed them in the pan, and immediately regretted my decision. The second the steak hit the pan, I heard a loud sizzle, and smoke started billowing from the pan. I quickly turned on the exhaust fan above the stove, but the smoke kept coming. It was like an inferno in there. I tried to keep calm. I wasn't going to let this ruin the surprise. I thought, it's just a little smoke. No big deal. I flipped the steaks after a few minutes, and that's when it happened. I heard a crackling sound, and before I could react, flames erupted from the pan. The oil had splattered and caught fire, and now my steak was a full-on fire hazard. I panicked. I grabbed the closest thing to me, which was a dish towel, and tried to swat at the flames. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea how to put out a grease fire. The fire was spreading fast. The pan was on fire, the stovetop was on fire, and now the entire kitchen was filled with smoke. I ran to the kitchen sink and started running water, thinking I could just douse the flames with some cold water. But then, I remembered reading somewhere that water makes grease fires worse. Panic set in. I wasn't thinking clearly. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the pantry, but I had never used one before. I didn't even know how to aim it properly. I pulled the pin, squeezed the handle, and the thing went off like a burst of white powder, shooting in every direction. I couldn't see anything. The kitchen was now covered in fire extinguisher dust. The smoke was thicker than ever, and the fire was still raging. At this point, I had completely lost control of the situation. I needed help, and fast. I grabbed my phone and called 911. My heart was racing, and I could barely get the words out. There's a fire in my kitchen. I don't know what to do. The dispatcher asked if I was safe, and I told her I was, but the fire was getting worse by the second. She told me to evacuate immediately and that help was on the way. I dashed out of the apartment, coughing and choking on the thick smoke that had filled every corner of the room. I had no idea how much damage had been done, but I knew I had to get out before it got worse. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the building, waiting for the fire department to arrive. The whole thing felt surreal. How had I gone from planning a nice, romantic dinner to calling the fire department? It felt like forever before the fire trucks showed up, but they eventually did. They rushed into the building, and after a few minutes, they came back out, assuring me that the fire was contained and that no one was hurt. The fire had been small enough that they were able to stop it before it spread, but the kitchen was completely destroyed. The stovetop was melted, the countertops were charred, and the walls were blackened with smoke. I looked at the firemen, completely embarrassed. They were kind enough to assure me that it wasn't my fault and that it happens all the time, but I couldn't shake the feeling of complete and utter failure. I texted Sarah and told her to come home immediately, that there had been an accident. When she got back, she saw the fire trucks parked outside, and she rushed up to the apartment to find me standing there, covered in soot and looking like I had just come from a war zone. She was obviously concerned, but when I explained what happened, she couldn't help but laugh. She told me it was sweet that I tried so hard to make her dinner, but that it was clear I had no idea what I was doing. We both stood in the ruined kitchen, trying to hold back laughter, and I felt a mix of relief and humiliation. In the end, we ended up ordering pizza. The firefighters gave me a card for a good repair company, and the apartment's landlord assured me that everything will be taken care of. I guess it wasn't a total disaster, but it certainly wasn't the romantic evening I had imagined. Sarah was kind enough not to be mad at me, but I don't think I'll be cooking again anytime soon. And the next time I want to impress her, I think I'll just take her to a nice restaurant instead. Moral of the story: don't try to surprise your significant other with a fancy homemade meal if you don't know what you're doing in the kitchen. You might end up with a ruined kitchen, a fire extinguisher covered in powder, and a girlfriend who will never let you live it down. TIFU by accidentally causing a near disaster at my friend's wedding. So, this is a story about how I almost ruined my best friend's wedding. I'm still in shock that it turned out as well as it did, and I need to share it with you all. This was one of those moments when, no matter how well-intentioned you are, things can go horribly wrong. A little background before I dive into the chaos. I, 26M, have been friends with Matt, 28M, for over a decade. We met in college, bonded over our shared love for obscure indie music, and have had each other's backs ever since. Matt and his fiancée, Sarah, 27F, have been dating for about 5 years. They're a solid couple, and I had the honor of being Matt's best man at their wedding. I was psyched. I've been to a lot of weddings, but this was the first one where I'd have a central role, and I wanted to be a great best man. I wanted everything to be perfect. The wedding was taking place at a beautiful old church about 45 minutes away from where we all live. The venue was picturesque, the decorations were perfect, and Sarah's dress was stunning. It was the kind of wedding you dream about. Everything was coming together. The night before the wedding, Matt had asked me to help with a few last-minute tasks. Pick up the tuxedo, ensure the wedding rings were ready, and maybe help with organizing the reception space a little. I was more than happy to help. I love Matt, and it felt like an honor to be so involved in the wedding prep. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything was running like clockwork. I arrived at the church early to help out with the final details. The first task was to transport some of the more delicate items, like the flower arrangements and the wedding cake, over to the reception hall. I had driven the rented van for this purpose, and I felt confident that I could handle this. What could possibly go wrong, right? As I was loading the van with the delicate items, Sarah's cousin, Emily, 30F, who was also a bridesmaid, came over and handed me an envelope. She said, "Hey, Matt asked me to give this to you. It's the final payment for the reception venue. He said you'd know what to do with it." Now, this is where I should have caught my mistake. But I didn't. I assumed that Matt had meant for me to drop the envelope off at the reception venue, so I tucked it under the seat of the van, thinking I'd take care of it after dropping off the flowers and cake. I didn't question it because, I was running around doing a million things and my brain was frazzled. I finished up the deliveries and then went to the church for the wedding ceremony. I was still feeling pretty good about how everything was going. I got changed into my tux, helped organize the groomsmen, and tried to stay calm as the ceremony was about to start. It was beautiful. The bride came down the aisle, looking radiant, and Matt was grinning ear to ear. It was a perfect moment. However, here's where things started to go south. Halfway through the ceremony, I noticed something was off. My phone, which I had left on silent, buzzed twice in quick succession. I excused myself from the aisle, went to the back of the church, and checked it. The text messages were from the reception venue manager. It read, "Where are you? We're still waiting on the payment for the venue." My heart sank. I quickly called the number listed, praying that I could smooth things over. The venue manager answered, sounding slightly frazzled. "Hey, we haven't received payment yet. It's critical we get that sorted before the reception starts, or we might not be able to host it." I was speechless for a moment. Then I realized what had happened. The envelope that Emily had handed me, it wasn't a random envelope. It was the payment for the entire reception. I had completely forgotten to take it to the venue, and now it was in the van sitting in the church parking lot. The thought of ruining the entire event made me dizzy. I explained the situation to the venue manager, telling them I would get the payment there immediately, but they made it clear that there was no time for mistakes. "You need to bring it to us now, or we might not be able to let you in," the manager said, their voice tight with frustration. At that point, I started panicking. I ran out of the church, bolting toward the parking lot. The wedding was in full swing, and here I was about to screw it all up. As I reached the van, I grabbed the envelope from under the seat and sprinted back to the reception venue. It was the most anxious drive I'd ever had, especially because I knew I was running out of time. By the time I reached the venue, I was practically sweating bullets. I burst into the building, waving the envelope like it was some sort of golden ticket. The venue manager was standing at the front desk, looking slightly annoyed, but not yet full-on furious. I handed over the envelope, and after what felt like an eternity, the manager gave a satisfied nod. "It's all good now. You're just in time," the manager said. I was so relieved that I could hardly contain myself. But then I looked around and realized the reception was in full swing. I had missed the grand entrance, the moment when Matt and Sarah were supposed to make their first entrance as husband and wife. It was too late. I had ruined that part. I slinked into the back of the reception hall, hoping no one would notice I had been gone. Thankfully, the guests were busy mingling, and no one seemed to care that I had missed the big moment. Still, I felt terrible. I had been so focused on the technicalities that I had let this one slip, and it almost caused the whole thing to fall apart. Somehow, Matt and Sarah didn't even seem to notice anything had gone wrong. They were in love and happy, and that was all that mattered. When I apologized to Matt later, he just laughed it off, telling me that it wouldn't be a wedding without at least one major disaster. So yeah, I almost ruined my best friend's wedding by forgetting the payment envelope. The whole thing could have been a disaster, but somehow I managed to fix it just in time. In the end, the wedding went off without a hitch. But I'll never forget how close I came to ruining everything. TIFU by accidentally getting my boss arrested. So, this is one of those moments that you never really think is going to happen to you, but it did. And now, I've spent the last week replaying the events in my head, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. In retrospect, it's a series of ridiculous mistakes that snowballed into one massive disaster. And now my boss is sitting in jail, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to live this down. It all started a few months ago when my boss, Derek, assigned me to be the lead on a project that was supposed to be a big deal. This project was a pitch for a potential new client, and if we nailed it, we'd land a multi-million-dollar deal that would not only boost the company's revenue, but also put all of us in good graces with upper management. Derek, being the type to overestimate his own importance, immediately put me in charge of the team. The whole office was buzzing about the project, and I could tell this was my moment to shine, or so I thought. At first, things went pretty smoothly. I gathered a small team, and we started brainstorming ideas. As the lead, I had to keep everything on track and make sure all deadlines were met, which was already a bit of a challenge considering how many moving pieces there were. But it wasn't anything I couldn't handle, or so I thought. As the days went by, I realized that Derek, despite being the boss, wasn't exactly pulling his weight. He'd pop in now and then, give a few suggestions, and then vanish for a week or two without any updates. Meanwhile, the pressure to deliver was mounting. We were working late nights, barely managing to stay on schedule, and I could see my team members starting to get frustrated. But I kept pushing them, kept pushing myself. We couldn't fail. Not now. Not after all this effort. Then came the day that things took a sudden and completely unexpected turn. It started with a meeting. Derek had scheduled a final review of the proposal before we submitted it. My team and I were nervous, but we'd done the work, we were confident in our pitch, and we had high hopes. Derek called the meeting for late afternoon, and everyone was gathered in the conference room. We went over the pitch slide by slide. Derek, of course, had no real feedback at this point, and that's when he decided to take charge. At some point during the meeting, Derek started getting agitated. He was upset that certain aspects of the presentation weren't bold enough or daring enough. We weren't being aggressive enough with our approach, he said. The problem was Derek wasn't actually giving any constructive criticism. He just started pointing out random things, talking over people, and basically making it impossible for anyone to explain or defend their work. I tried to steer the conversation back on track, but Derek was on a roll now. He started tossing out these off-the-wall ideas that had no connection to the work we were doing. They were completely impractical and, quite frankly, absurd. At one point, Derek suggested we include an interactive segment where we would be live streaming part of the pitch to our potential client. I kid you not, this was his idea, a live streaming component in a corporate pitch meeting. As if that was something that would somehow impress the client. I didn't want to upset him in front of the team, but this suggestion was so ridiculous that I couldn't hold it in. I tried to push back, saying it wasn't realistic and that we didn't have the technical capability for such a thing. Derek shot me down, and instead of listening to reason, he doubled down on the idea, insisting that I figure it out. I was frustrated. We were already behind schedule, and now I had to figure out how to incorporate a completely unworkable live stream into the presentation. I didn't know what to do. So, in a moment of desperation, I made a decision that would prove to be my biggest mistake. Derek had this colleague, Lisa, who worked in the tech department. She was always a bit of a wild card, but she had a reputation for being able to do just about anything with technology. She had set up some crazy virtual events for the company in the past, so when I saw Derek's live streaming suggestion, I figured she'd be the one to make it happen. Without thinking too much about it, I emailed Lisa, explained the situation, and asked her to set up a live stream for the presentation. I didn't go into much detail because I assumed she'd understand what I meant. In hindsight, that was mistake number one. I should have explained everything clearly, but I didn't. The day of the presentation came, and everything was going, okay, I guess. The slides were ready, the team was prepared, and we were all just hoping the client would see our vision. Derek, however, was antsy. He kept checking his watch and looking at his phone. I was starting to get anxious because, well, things were already tense and I didn't want them to implode. As the time approached, I noticed that Lisa wasn't answering my calls or emails. I was starting to panic because we had no backup plan for the live stream. I couldn't just tell Derek that his idea was a bust. The client arrived, and we went into the conference room, ready to present. Derek started off, rambling as usual, and I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. My team was giving me nervous looks, but I told them everything was going to be fine. We would get through it. And then, in the middle of Derek's pitch, the live stream cut in. But it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of the sleek professional presentation we had hoped for, it was a live feed of a completely random, blurry video of Derek's face with an absurd background of a beach. Derek had, in a panic, tried to make the live stream himself using some software that Lisa had shown him a while back, and the result was a complete disaster. The client was visibly confused. Derek tried to play it off, saying it was part of the innovative approach. But the damage was already done. The client looked at each other, bewildered, and then they politely excused themselves. And that was that. The deal was off. What happened next was even worse. Derek, enraged by the failed presentation, stormed out of the room. He went straight to HR and accused me of sabotaging the pitch. He told them that I had been the one to set up the inappropriate live stream and that I had not followed through with his vision. HR didn't know what to do, so they escalated the issue to legal. I found out later that Derek had even gone to the police, claiming that someone had hacked into our system and intentionally ruined the meeting. To cut a long story short, the situation escalated so badly that Derek was arrested for filing a false police report. It turns out that the software he had used for the live stream wasn't even secure, and the hack he claimed was just his own error. He'd gotten so carried away with his own ego that he'd panicked and made everything worse. And somehow, I ended up at the center of it all. I still can't believe how it all unraveled so quickly. Derek is currently on administrative leave while HR investigates the whole fiasco, and my team is in limbo. I have no idea what the future holds, but I'm trying to stay positive. So, yeah, that's how I ended up accidentally getting my boss arrested. 10 out of 10, would not recommend. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.